Thank you. So yes, the summary and the list of some 55 amendments to the Red Book is a major overhaul, and it incorporates a number of changes that the subcommittee, Procedures and Planning Subcommittee, have approved going back to May of last year for changes to aquaculture, municipal harbor regulations, residential boating facilities, etc. Now, under the revised Administrative Procedures Act, for rulemaking, agency rulemaking, we are required to hold a public hearing in the middle of the 30-day comment period. So we must hold it no later than 5 days before the end of the comment period. So accordingly, the comment period, which started on August 19th, will end on August 16th, will end on September 17th, next Monday. So we're holding tonight an opportunity for the public to comment on the proposed amendments. As of now, with the new procedure and the website for agencies to file their rulemaking, the public is also allowed to make online comments on the rulemaking portal on the Secretary of State's website. As of this morning, when I checked, there were no online comments. We have received one set of comments from Save the Bay, which I believe were distributed to council members this morning electronically. And so my plan is to, we're actually at the moment analyzing the comments submitted by Save the Bay. The executive director and I met with Save the Bay staff on Friday, August 31st, to discuss some of their comments. And we agreed to disagree on some of them because they were substantive changes. And as Save the Bay indicates in their letter, they're happy to defer on those to another set of amendments to the Red Book when we can work out some issues. About a quarter of these comments, by the way, are Save the Bay's proposed changes to definitions, of which we weren't planning on changing the definitions, meaning or intent. To the extent that they are just technical revisions, we can easily incorporate those. And any other changes that the council feels are not substantive. Because if we were to look at substantive changes to what's been out to notice, we'd have to re-notice and go through another comment period, etc. So at this point, when the public comment period closes next Monday, the 17th, I will finish my staff report to the council, and along with a recommendation. I can tell you at the moment, at least speaking for myself, I will be recommending to the council to approve all the amendments as proposed and as presented to you in your package. To the extent that we might accept some of these changes that Save the Bay has offered, I will detail those in the staff report, and you will receive that in advance of the next council meeting. So for tonight, we'll hear public comment, if there is any, close the public hearing, and then at the next meeting, after the close of the public comment period, the council would then take up deliberations to adopt the amendments with any proposed changes that the council sees fit, and the staff, again, will have its recommendation in the staff report in advance of the September 25th meeting.
Madam Chair, there's a couple of important things I think to point out too. The first is that the next hearing that we have, the council's not obligated to take any public comment at that point. They can vote on it without any additional public comment. So
correct.
That's a major shift in the APA. The other thing is that while there are significant changes, what we've done is essentially taken several existing regulatory documents and sort of just meshed them into the Red Book now. So we used to have, for instance, the separate energy amendments. Those have now been brought into this program. So while it looks like there's a lot of changes going on, a lot of it is just bringing in existing language that exists in other parts of the program and centralizing it into one document now. The other thing that should be noted is that the Red Book, and not many people know this, replaced chapters 1 through 5 but there were a series of other chapters that existed in the 1978 plan that are still in effect. So to the extent that those need to be brought in, they're also being brought in. One of them, for instance, is on public participation in how the council operates. So that will be brought in as part of this program. As a little side note, our program approval was in 1978, so we're now celebrating 40 years of federal approval with our program, which gave us then the Federal Consistency Authority. What is a major shift also, and you'll see this if you were to compare the documents, is that ORR has been asking us to remove a lot of our findings. So because they're not, in effect, regulations, thou shalt do this or thou shalt not do that, they wanted those pruned out and put into an appendices that can be referred to, but are not necessarily the regulation itself. We were very concerned about that. We had a number of discussions with ORR because many times the findings, when we go into court, are given a fair amount of weight, and we were concerned about that. According to the legal counsel at ORR, they will still have that weight. That remains to be seen. I think we'll find that out in our first court cases as we get in on this, but that's a significant change for us. So what we have been doing to accommodate that is there were certain findings that almost rose to the level of a policy, so we brought those into the program now, while we've been taking out more of the factual-based findings and putting them into the agendas, into the appendices. So that's what this is reflected here. The last thing I'll just note, and this is more of a housekeeping item, if you could keep this packet, it would be appreciated. We will send you another electronic version before the next meeting, but we'd rather not duplicate this and send it out to the council.
And save the paper. Yeah.
Reduce our carbon footprint.
And just very quickly, also, as part of my staff report to the council, I will detail all of the Planning and Procedures Subcommittee meetings. There were 4 held in the past year, of which the subcommittee approved for rulemaking substantive amendments here to the Red Book, which are all embedded. A number of those were, of course, big changes to the aquaculture section, former 300.11, that both the CRMC and DEM sat down in the marine fisheries section, and Dave Butel, our aquaculture coordinator, worked very hard to come to a lot of agreement in terms of responsibility between the agents, and so we're now consistent across the board on procedures. We did shoreline change maps for Block Island, which Professor Brian Oakley and John Boothroyd had started and put together, so that we will now have high-resolution orthophotography shoreline change maps for Block Island. There's 9 maps. Those, again, were approved by Planning and Procedure Subcommittee for rulemaking, and also a water type change for the town of Bristol, abutting the Roger Williams University shoreline. So all of these things are in play for the council to adopt. And lastly, I hope that this is the last big change to the Red Book, at least for the time being. We've worked very hard as a team to bring our entire coastal program into compliance with the Rhode Island Code of Regulations and the requirements of the Office of Regulatory Reform. As the executive director said, we were required to prune out things like findings, and those texts and sections within both the Red Book and our special area management plans that were not strictly policy standards or prohibitions. So what we ended up doing was, based on the metrics that the Office of Regulatory Reform had set up to look at how efficient they were being in reducing regulations, it was by page count. So when you look at our page count, we were a little over 2,800 pages between the Red Book and the Special Area Management Plans. By my last count last week, we are down to about 1,000 pages of regulations that conform with the RICRO, the Rhode Island Code of Regulations. So that's about a 65% page reduction. We are also fully compliant with the Office of Regulatory Reform in terms of getting all of our regulations filed with ORR before the end of August, which has just passed. And most of our regulations are now effective, or they're being processed through the Secretary of State's office for comment. And so by the end of this calendar year, including these changes to the Red Book, if the council approves these on September 25th, before the end of this calendar year, every one of our regulations will be effective, and we will definitely meet the end-of-year deadline that the Office of Regulatory Reform had established, so that if any state agency has a rule that is not codified by December 31st of this year, as of January 1, it does not exist. So we'll be okay.
Deadline, yeah. Well, I commend you and all other staff members who worked on this, because this is a huge undertaking. Go ahead.
Two comments, Madam Chair. The first is that, and I didn't know where the slot is, but NOAA is looking at potentially scheduling what's called a 312 evaluation. The last one was in 2010. They're looking at scheduling another one for this February. So some of this may become embroiled in that, hopefully not, but it's just to be aware of that. It could become an element within the NOAA review.
So just from a process standpoint, if anyone has questions, are we asking them at the September 25th meeting, our next meeting, after we're just to receive the public comment tonight and to be notified that this is happening?
But I think it's also appropriate that if the members have any questions now, it's okay to discuss it prior to the close of the
Absolutely.
comments.
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer any questions that council members may have on any one of these amendments. I do want to note that I will not be present at the meeting of the 25th, but my staff report will be quite detailed and complete, so that...
After he gets the GOP.
Yes, after I get the GOP. That's another, that's another... So,
And that will go through categories of the types of amendments that we've just addressed here. Okay.
correct, Madam Chair.
All right,
Of
Mr.
the,
Goinstein.
55 amendments, changes proposed, about how much of that has gone through P&P? Seems like I see a lot of somebody has stuff here.
Well,
So,
All the changes have, except for the stuff that may have been existing language that was just being rematched.
but we talked about that.
Yeah.
correct.
All I'm trying to get at is, this has been vetted by the subcommittee pretty
Correct.
much.
Yes.
All of the substantive changes have been vetted by Planning Procedures Subcommittee. The only changes that Planning Procedures Subcommittee would not have seen are very minor technical corrections to sections. For example, we had rules, we had sections of the rule that were out of compliance with our governing statute. So we just brought that language in so that it was consistent with the statute. So, and I made careful notations highlighted in yellow on the color copies where you can see why that change was made. So I'll have to, by the way, once we end up filing a final edition with the Secretary of State's office, I'm gonna have to go page by page and delete all of my notes because they're not in track changes, like all of the amendments and deletions are. So it'll take a couple of days.
Hunker down.
Saturday and Sunday works.
Yeah. If need be.
Okay.
And just how many of these amendments were sort of existing policies, long-standing policies that will now get rolled into actual regulations?
I think the vast majority of them are, if we were to put a percentage on it, probably 90%.
I would say actually more than that. For example, in the harbor regulations section, all of the standards and policies that are in there came right out of the guidance document. But they were really regulatory in nature because in the guidance document, they were required elements of a harbor management plan. So I worked with our harbor management coordinator, Kevin Cute. We pulled out all of those elements of the guidance document that read like a standard, and now they're embedded in the Red Book. So what we're doing here really is codifying long-standing practice and existing policy or guidance that is now codified so that it actually reads like a regulation and will be treated like a regulation other than a guidance document.
So one of the things I think is a little bit of an exception to that is just the beach stamp. I notice in your, right
Correct.
above that, hey, this is not mandatory, but now it's going to direct the applicants to
Exactly.
go through this, but it's not this, iron fist.
Right, it's
Yeah.
trigger points which they'll have to conduct the analysis.
Sure.
So then there'll be certain applications that have to go through the analysis as part of their application, but the analysis doesn't direct them to actually undertake. It provides them with a lot of information that will anticipate future conditions so that they can build to those future conditions rather than today's.
So to your example, Madam Chair, so we added a new section 1.1.6I, and that is the coastal hazard application process. So that's a brand new section, and that implements the beach SAMP guidance document that the council adopted earlier this year.
5-part different colors.
Yes, precisely,
Okay.
right, exactly, the 5-step process.
Yeah.
So because the beach SAMP was adopted by the council as a guidance document, a living document that we can modify, not subject to the APA, the council can change it anytime it wants.
Right.
However, we implement the coastal hazard application process, which is in chapter 5, that 5-step analysis is implemented through the Red Book through this new section. So as the executive director indicated, you meet any of those thresholds, then you're required as an applicant to go through the process, and you would use the guidance document to help guide you through those steps.
Yep.
It's probably, well, for the council's interest in this, one of the things that we found when we were going through the beach SAMP is that FEMA's maps had grossly underestimated the wave and surge conditions on the South Shore, as much as 10 feet in certain areas. So as to overcome those deficiencies, what the council's done, and we now have online, staff is going through the final review of it, but it is what we call design elevation maps, but they're really new base flood elevation maps. And it reflects the current condition. It is the state-of-the-art modeling that has dealt with this, but it's very interesting for me, scary, to look at those wave and surge conditions offshore. So for a 1954 hurricane, the wave and surge coming into our South Shore is about 35 feet. And that is, say, a category 2 to 3 storm. If you had a storm that South Carolina is about to experience in North Carolina, and where it hits, they could be even larger than that. So it's just astounding, the forces that are there. So we are correcting for that and bringing that into the SAMP too. We've been doing that with the support of the Builders Association. We have a new process that was approved through legislation now that allows applicants to substitute those numbers to improve their chances of survival. The other thing that the council will note is that there's now an expanded CVA requirement. We've used this for offshore, so successful offshore, that we have wanted to import it for certain facilities onshore or in state waters where this process has existed within primarily for renewable energy projects. We are also bringing it in for energy projects because these large-scale projects often strip or outstrip the capacity of our council staff to review and understand the impacts. The CVAs have a multitude of experience in these areas and can often provide the council then with a third-party review and report of those facilities and whether they meet current industry standards or not, which will be very helpful if a federal partner is backing us on these. So,
I'll just add that the certified verification agent requirement is section 1.3.1H, and that was approved by the Planning and Procedures Subcommittee back on June 12th. So, again, these substantive new sections, major amendments to sections, have all gone through Planning and Procedures Subcommittee, and those will be detailed in my staff report to the council for the meeting on the 25th. And I'm happy to answer any further questions council members may have.
So the consolidation and streamlining that's been mandated by the ORR, that's pursuant to legislative change,
Correct.
statutory mandates,
To the
correct?
Administrative Procedures
And that
Act,
was
correct.
a couple of years ago that got passed.
2016, correct. Yeah.
Thank you for all your hard work. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Boyd? If not, then I'll invite any members of the public who would like to comment on these proposed changes. No one? Right, so do we need to do anything as far as?
Move to close the public hearing.
Just, okay, so Amanda, thank you. Second?
Second.
Thanks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.